driving flashy cars, building houses, breaking in.
The number of teachers that were coming as compared to the number we were expecting was over 70%. So those who are supposed not to have enough money and whatever, we are hoping by the end of this week they will have borrowed enough money to go back to work.
So we can't then be told that the country has no money. When we see people driving flashy cars, building houses, breaking into mountains and building palaces.
Zimbabwean education is at the percent. Children are going to school on an alternating basis, 2 days at most per week. Teachers are unhappy over their salaries. In fact, to say they are unhappy, it's an understatement. They say their salaries are not even enough to allow them to commute to and from work every single day. The fees that is being paid in schools is not even enough to ensure the day-to-day running of the institutions is smooth. And then comes the struggle for the pupils themselves and students in universities and primary education to get transport to go to school. We saw images of young children being packed in the back of a car as they struggled to go to school. No respect for social distancing in this COVID-19 era. Now, to discuss this, the state of education in Zimbabwe and where we are going with our primary and secondary education, the base of making an educated nation, I'm joined by those who lead teachers, the Teachers Union, to discuss this on the Free Talk. I'm joined by the President of ZimTA, Richard. Thank you very much for coming through.
Thank you very much, Blessed.
Amazing.
It's a great opportunity to have a conversation on education.
I'm also joined by the Secretary General for the Progressive Teachers Union, Ray. Thank you very much, my former teacher. Amazing. Now, let's start with you, Richard. Can you just paint a picture for us? What is the state of education in this country?
Thank you, Blessed. We have a crisis in education at the moment. That is the long and short of it. We are in crisis. In the wake of COVID-19, the crisis has been made worse. In a situation where the nation cannot mobilize internal resources in order to adequately fund education, we find ourselves in a crisis. In a situation where the learners and the children whose parents cannot pay their fees And at the same time, government, whose obligation is to make sure that they take care of everybody who can not take care of themselves, you will find that the absence of adequate safety nets to cushion this segment of the population makes it very difficult for learners to access education. So we are in a state of crisis.
I'll come to you, with the same question from your perspective. What is the problem with the Zimbabwean education system right now?
I think I will simply say the problem is the people. I'll put the blame squarely back to where it's supposed to be domiciled. Political will. Do we have the political will to address the challenges? I think the challenges that we are facing about our education are not new. These are basically inherent challenges that the education system have faced for a very long time. And I'll simply say, first and foremost, we need the political will to interrogate, identify the problem, and then proffer solutions. If that is done, then we will obviously say, yes, we know what we are doing. I will look at the challenges in education from the perspective of infrastructure. We have schools that don't even qualify to be called schools. We have a situation on the ground where it's actually unbelievable that 40 years into our independence, we have dagger and pole structures. Students coming to school into a structure called a class that doesn't have a wall, that students who have been coming to school for 5 years and they have not sat on a desk. Students that come to school and don't even know what a mouse is. They have never seen a computer, but they are told they are studying ICT. And these are the challenges that we are saying, if we are honest as a country, as a citizen, why are we allowing this to happen? We have people who have passed through our education system, some in London, some in New York, some in Vanuatu, some in St. Kitts. People have then not looked back and say, where we came from, we are supposed to come back and develop, because of the umbilical link that must obviously exist between ourselves and our past. So I will simply say, government is not showing the political will. If anything, I think there are people who are actually working flat out to make sure that our public education is destroyed. Many of the politicians in this country have invested in private education. They got farms, got loans, built schools. And what they are trying to do simply is assassinate public education, so that everybody thinks that taking their child to a private school is basically the situation of choice. And ultimately what that then does is we make sure that we create an avenue. There's actually a very big gap now between Highfield High 1 and some of these affluent high schools. Go to Glenview, secondary, and see what is happening there and these private schools. So somebody is basically trying to make it a point that teachers that are teaching in private schools appear better. Teachers in public schools are open for condemnation. Salaries are pathetic. There is no housing to talk about. The welfare of the teacher is actually terrible. This is why if you interrogate the conditions of service for teachers in 1980 and in 2020, you'll find a serious gap. Teachers at that particular period in our independence could afford a house, could send their kids to school, could dress properly, could ultimately become role models. 2021, a teacher is a laughing stock. They can't afford underwear. They can't afford basics. They can't send their own kids to preschool. They can't even feed themselves. They can't dress properly. And who is ultimately responsible? It's the government, it's the state, it's the nation. Because there's no political will to make sure that our teachers remain the role models that they ordinarily should be. And if you pauperize the profession, you deliberately assassinate it. And what that then does is you make the person who is supposed to be responsible irresponsible. They abdicate. And what you basically have done is you have made the teacher irrelevant in the process, in the eye of the child. They are lodgers. They are the ones who are scrambling for transport. You see parliament and cabinet ministers discussing about teachers. They laugh and joke about the welfare of a teacher to say the teachers are here to borrow, and they laugh. What are you saying to your own self? The country is actually a mess, because these are the people who are supposed to inspire Zimbabwe into gloryhood.
I'll come back to you. But in your prognosis as ZimTA, maybe coming from the point that I'm looking at, the pupils are not really the problem, are they? Because they present themselves to school when they should. but it is the teachers who are not coming in or who are not working as we knew them when we went to school. What is the problem?
You are right, Blessed. While the learners themselves might appear to be presenting themselves, they play their part. That's fine. And you are talking about the educators. Now, the educators are in a very difficult state because for years, the educators have been moonlighting. They have been borrowing. They are now over-borrowed. They can't borrow anymore. They have been moonlighting, sometimes even working in dangerous situations and hazardous places in order to get an extra dollar, which dollar they would then use to go to work and come back home. You see, this is what has led us to this situation that we call incapacitation. Incapacitation, we will unpack it as we go. It is important that everybody understands what that term means. It means much as you would like to do something, you can't. You would like to walk, you don't have the legs. You want to touch something, you don't have the fingers. Right? Because your employer has taken away, has removed the salary. This is literally what happened back then in 2018. The salary was literally removed, wiped off. There was no salary and they started from scratch. We got to a point where $25 to $30, that was the time, Raymond will agree with me, that at one point, a teacher earned 25 US dollars. What would you do with that? So what the economic policies simply did was to remove, when they took the salary off the US dollar index, they literally removed it and then started from scratch. Now, as they start from scratch, they will argue that we are making salary adjustments upwards. No. You are already in the negative. Where is the poverty line? Our indicators are poverty datum line. Our indicators are a living wage.
Do you get that living wage, and are you above the poverty datum line at the moment?
Way below. We are not even talking about the least paid teacher here. We are talking about a head of a school who earns a salary which is below the poverty line. We agreed back then, as early as 2014, we agreed that there was no way a teacher's salary would go below the poverty line. Then we were working towards a poverty line of 520, am I right, Raymond?
Yes.
We agreed that for the time being, we are not asking for the moon, the stars and everything. We are simply asking for the PDL, the poverty line. So take us to the poverty line, right? So we got to a point where a teacher from college, from university, would start from 520. For that time, that was the poverty line. We agreed there is no way, it's written, there is no way, it's well agreed, that salaries could then go below the poverty line. What happened then, the policies that then came after 2018, they completely eroded that salary down to $25, $30. And now whatever we are doing, we shouldn't be negotiating at all, because you don't negotiate when you are below the poverty line. What you simply do is you demand that, and it must be given.
But you failed to demand it. You have been divided as unions, and you have been undercutting each other. Aren't you the problem?
That is what the people who want you to believe that is, they project that division. We are not divided. We are fighting for the same cause. Read our positions. Our methods of doing it might be different. And that is the good thing about it. Because then we complement very well towards achieving one single goal. If you follow closely what we say, what we write, we are all talking about a common thing. This is why we are agreeing, the two of us, that 520, 540 is the demand. So there's agreement around the demand. And then how we then fight for it might be different from time to time. But we are fighting for the same thing, and we complement one another. So there is nobody who should come to us and then tell us that we are divided. No. Nobody. The names of the different unions, that doesn't matter, right? That spices up the whole game. We are working towards one common goal, The common cause is the welfare of the teacher. The common cause is to make sure that we defend the gains we have made in the past in terms of protecting quality public education. I like what Raymond said earlier, public education, and we see that public education is under threat. We have seen this happening in some countries. I will name Liberia, for example, where they invaded the country and introduced some kind of commercializing education, privatization of education, and privatization in education, where you will find that some services within the school, within the learning institution, are privatized. For example, there's a school bus that is meant to take learners for a trip to Victoria Falls. And then additional demands are made in order to get into that school bus, over and above the levies, over and above the fees. By the way, the same levies are the ones that bought that bus. But then there will be an element of saying, if you don't pay a certain amount of money, you don't qualify for certain services. Some go down to the extent of saying you don't qualify to go to the lab. You can get into the school, yes, get into the classroom, but for you to get into the lab, you have to pay extra. For you to get into that bus for an educational trip, that's the beginning. People don't see it. So if we explained it, thank you for this program. You are giving us an opportunity to say, parents out there must be watchful, because there's a big attempt at commercializing education. Education is a public good. It must, at best, be free. And where parents cannot pay, government must come to the party and strengthen their safety nets to make sure that every child goes to school and that teachers get their jobs and they play their part and they are well paid.
Raymond, you guys as teachers have been crying over these salaries, and you have been saying that you are going to withdraw labor, or at some point you're incapacitated, you can't go to schools, but we still find you in schools. And you still make noise, but you're still there.
Yeah. Those are the challenges of societies where people are allowed to exercise their rights. It's not like it's wrong, but you must always understand that there is a force behind all this. If you listen to what President Gundani says, he says the so-called division that is projected is a state-sponsored initiative. The state wants to make people believe that ZIMTA and PTs that are two different entities fighting for two different objectives, and they are always at each other. That's not true. We are standing up to fight and defend our territory, but once in a while, ideologically we differ, and that is part of what the world must celebrate. We must celebrate our diversity. We must celebrate how we achieve certain results. And you know what happens with entities? There are people who want results now, and there are people who are saying, let us engage and let the results come. The difference is in the agents of the matter. For the PTUs that we believe in answers now, because that is where we are born out of the struggle. We are born out of the realization that we must stand up and demand what is legitimately ours, and we demand it now without any equivocation, without flinching, without apologizing. And this is good because it then helps us and it helps everybody, because where ideas and maturity is needed, other entities come into play. Where the agency and the exuberance of demands are made, we come in. But ultimately, we complement each other and the results come by. The most important point that you therefore raise is, when all these things happen, government has always wanted to say the unions are not united. What stops government from putting our salaries where they ordinarily should be, and they embarrass us, so that they say we gave teachers $520 and there was no union to negotiate because they are bickering and fighting there. But because we are a responsible government, we have a surplus. We are the responsible government. We are the listening government with a listening president. Open doors and open arms. We have given teachers $520, but the teachers never negotiated for it. Why then not give us that situation? Than to turn around and deny teachers a living wage, deny teachers the proper conditions of service, deny teachers basic things like dialogue and engagement. You can't have a government that goes about and lies through its teeth that they're engaging teachers when they are not.
You have been engaged, you have been in the president's office before. We saw pictures of you having meetings with President Emerson Mnangagwa.
You are very right. If you see pictures and you assume that negotiations happened because you saw pictures, I will ask you to revise that again. Many people, when we went to meet the president, it was for a completely different demand. And this was the buy-in, and it was part of the presidential attempt to give people a projection of being a welcoming person. Of course, I don't regret going to meet the president. We met the president, presented our own situations, and he has our own issues that are outstanding. For instance, and I think let me address this one here, it will be very important. The president promised to address the issue of teacher spouses. Like if a couple is married, one is in Binga and the other one is in Umgozi. Why should people who are married be separate? Why can't you take them to one district or at least schools that are nearby so that we are able to address challenges like HIV and AIDS? Because the moment you leave two married people, one in one province and the other province, you are not addressing. Those are some of the basic issues that the president consented to and said these are obviously addressed. There was the second one, the second issue that the president consented to. It was the issue of saying when teachers want to import vehicles, they get a duty-free scenario and they go through it. But the process is so rigorous, so laborious and so boring. Many teachers who have tried, they've actually given up and said, no, we can't because of the nature of the red tape in the process. So these are some of the third point that I also want to raise when the president considered to was the issue of teachers ultimately getting gadgets. Like one, we have teachers with disabilities that the president said he's going to look around for computers and laptops to give people with hearing impairments and visual impairments and many others, some wheelchairs. That has then not been delivered. So I will basically pick on these three. And we want to make it a point that I will simply say to the president, we are still waiting for those to be honored. And the other one was, we told the president that a teacher who got a job in 1979 earns a salary that is only $23 more than a teacher who gets a job today. Is that acceptable? We are talking of a teacher with experience, who is degreed, who is a headmaster like Mr. Gundani has said, served the ministry for 40 years, and the salary difference between him and the university graduate that he has graduated from university last week is only $23. Do you think it's acceptable? Where in the world have you seen such disparities being acceptable? So these are the basic things that we thought if you're going to go to the president and he would listen to them, you'd obviously whisper to his boys and say, truly, address this problem. Hey, Mafima, they address it, but it appears that has not been done. So we have a serious challenge that exists. The teachers that report for duty, you know what happens in this world of work? The employer, who is the government, is very clever. They employ people who are called the strike breakers. It's deliberate. They invite, they allow. There are people that they send into these schools, some who basically serve as informers, some who come in because they are married to top government officials, some people who then become seriously compromised that they can't even stand up for their rights. So that is why you definitely find out it's going to be very difficult for us to unite. And the government knows that if people get unionized, they speak with one voice. Government deliberately sponsors the division within the civil service. They actually sponsor some unions. I will not be able to say that one and that one and that one. But government always sponsors this. This is not a new phenomenon. It's nothing new to Zimbabwe. It's happening in the world over. But the most important point that I want to underscore here is teachers out there are united. Even if you go to these schools and say there are teachers who are present, those people are 100% present, but they are 100% psychologically absent. They are 100% emotionally absent. Don't go and count people who are present because you've counted the bodies. Go and look at what they are doing in these schools. These people are actually doing a big disservice to the country. They are going to the country to market their goods, sell their wares to their kids, and not do the teaching that they are supposed to be doing. So ultimately, when the nation and anybody interrogates and want to find out to say there are teachers who are in these schools. What are they doing? Doing absolutely nothing. So the most important point is, let's go to basics. Let's agree on what needs to be done. Let's revisit the conditions of service, address those. I don't see any problem. Many of the things that we've asked for are basic things that the government could give without suffering any prejudice financially. Because what we are saying is non-monetary incentives. Give teachers land, let them build houses, and ultimately the situation addresses itself. But the government has then not considered to simple basic things like these ones.
So, Mr. Gunnet, you're selling sweets, in class, and you're not teaching. Is this factual?
I said it earlier, Blessed. I said it. I considered, I said, teachers, we are moonlighting in order to fill the gap between the low salary and what we need to cater for our families. This is happening. And where we are, I know you will say that this is illegal because government says it's illegal. The regulations say it is legal. But it is real. And where we should be going now is to say, why don't we look at some of these things and say, practice informs policy. Some of these practices, if they've assisted us to go forward, why don't you then go to regulate to say, no, this is how best you can moonlight. Moonlighting in health is given a very healthy name. People do locums and things like that. There are moonlighters everywhere in every trade. It's well regulated, it's understood how it is going to be done and how it is going to be paid. It is said that a teacher then must be forced to go down to bringing a pack of lollipops or mastambo in class in order to sell. No, that's not the kind of moonlighting that we are talking about. We are talking about properly regulated ways of offering a service to parents and learners out there who would like that service, and it's properly regulated. If this is what is going to help us move forward as a country, those are some of the options we are offering right now as we go. To say, this is why schools appear to be ticking. This is what is making the physical presence of teachers and other educators in the classroom, because they are getting money using moonlighting. But that's not what we want. We would like government to play its role and pay adequate remuneration.
But do you think government cares about you as teachers?
If there is no difference, then you say, my employer doesn't care. You asked the question earlier to say, are you playing your part by negotiating? We are doing all we can. We are very visible. This is part of the process of actually getting the world to know, the same government, the same employer to know. But if there's no traction on the ground, then you then start saying, is my employer caring? Does the employer care about me? Or I should take care of myself and then go on to donate my labor. This is what has been happening. If we were to quantify, it's possible to do that. To say, what component of the monthly salary comes from government, and what component, no, the contribution that goes to education, what component comes from government and what component comes from myself as an individual teacher. You'll find that probably we are at 50-50, or sometimes the individual teacher is at 60 and government is at 40. And nobody acknowledges that. So it's time that we looked at those things. What we would like from a trade union, teacher trade union perspective, you raised that question earlier, is to say, we really support issues of social dialogue. It's one of the things that is in our mandate. So this is why we participate in collective bargaining processes. This is why we engage at every level of the three arms of government, right? The executive, parliament, and also the judiciary. We use those three arms of government, depending on the situation. And right now, the PTUZ and ZIMTA, you have an issue that is running in parliament, challenging parliament to say, you have not conformed to section 65 of the Zimbabwean constitution, which guarantees the right to collective bargaining and the right to strike. But then when you go to the Act, the Public Service Act, will say the Public Service Commission will fix, they continue to fix They are giving unilateral offers. Even when you refuse, they say we'll go on and pay. Because we are the employer, right? Modern industrial relations are not like that. We know that we participate in the ILO world conferences and fora like that. We are well aware of the standards as well as the conventions. And we are also aware that some of those conventions, 98, 90, 97, 89, 115, are now institutionalized in the Constitution. But why is it that since 2013, the Constitution has not been implemented? Because the acts are way different from what is in the Constitution. Why deny us our right? Why not come up with a proper collective bargaining framework? This is why you will hear Parliament is talking about that now, because we took that issue to Parliament.
I want to come to the cost to the nation that these problems are bringing. What is the cost to the nation in the future? Maybe we might not see it now, but as teachers, you would know.
It's disastrous.
Right, it's very sad. Because what we would like is when we are making projections about where we want the country to be economically in 2030, right? This is going to be driven through education. This will definitely be driven through what? Through education. And we are aware about that. The development of any country thrives on the output that we get from the education system, and it has to be of very high quality. Attempts have been made to change the curriculum, what we teach. Yes, we agree in terms of what is on paper. We may then differ with government in terms of the implementation of certain things. Yes, but in terms of the framework that is in place to say, let us have a competence-based curriculum, let us have innovative learners who come from that school system, who then understand their culture, understand their heritage and resources, and then develop this country. We are all agreed in terms of what has to happen there. But how is that going to be achieved if at the same time then we are not ready to adequately fund education in order to get the human capital that is required in order to drive towards that goal of economic development? Some people argue and say the reason why you are not being paid, you are just a social service, you are not productive, you are not profitable, we cannot calculate what you are bringing to the table. That is not true.
It's nonsensical.
It's not true. And we have to change our thinking around that. And we have to attach importance to teachers. Look at what is happening in Sweden. That is, am I right? Is it Sweden or Finland? Is it Sweden? The best example.
Both of them.
Yeah, both of them. Best examples of education in the world. And even if you look at the satisfaction index, peace of mind and everything, you find it in that country. The best students, the A students from high school, from university, become teachers. So we have models to follow. That is not very difficult. We have models to follow. And we know the level of development that those countries have achieved. We could do the same.
You could come in.
I think the tragedy with ourselves is we have a country that thinks, where people think that everybody can be a teacher. People who look at teachers, trivialize them, laugh at them. But I always ask this question. You don't become an electrician by the number of times that you put on, where you switch on and off lights in your house. Neither do you become a doctor by the number of times that you visit a clinic or a hospital. You have to be trained. And if you're going to offer a particular service, you have to be trained for it. It's actually said that teaching is the only profession where many parents will claim to have passed through the process and say, I was a student. Somebody could say, I was a teacher before, I could be a teacher. But ultimately, there are certain fundamentals that you need to understand for you to be able to stand up and say, you are relevant in that particular arena. And this is why ultimately, if you look at what President Gundane has been putting across, if we are going to get to a point where we are ultimately going to say we don't need teachers, anybody can be a teacher, we can take border gazes and send them to schools and teach like happened in the past. We can take people from RX, they can go and invigilate exams, we can take soldiers and the CIOs and they can go and teach. What country operates like that? We are not a banana republic. We are a country that must respect this profession called teaching and education.
But I want
if you're going to get the best out of it.
But I want to hear from you the cost on the child.
I was coming to that.
Yes.
I was saying, if you look at what is happening on the ground, we've abdicated the national responsibility of making sure that we have the proper infrastructure. What we are doing to these kids is we have the attrition rate. If you look at the damage that it creates into some of the kids, they get to a point where ultimately they get frustrated. If you look at the collateral damage that has happened to the kids, like kids who go to school and they don't get attended to, who come to school and there's nothing, ultimately they basically become antisocial. And the impact cannot be seen now. But look at the 14-year-olds when they get 28 and 30. They resort to violence. They don't reason about anything. They become anarchic. They become drug addicts. And many of these other vices come in. So this is why we are saying the collateral damage that happens because of this educational neglect will be there to be felt by citizens 10, 15 years from now. Because that's when you then say, if it was a tree, wrong fruits, it's an apple tree, but out of that apple tree, you see guava things on it. It's no longer what it's supposed to be. And this is what is happening. When we inculcate values at education, we are trying to create loyalty, we are trying to create decency, we are trying to put honesty, we are trying to put all these fundamental points of saying, how does one become a good citizen? But having said that, when you then disinvest in education, you pretend to be doing the right thing and doing the wrong thing, you create challenges because the teachers in themselves are frustrated. They don't become of value. There's no value addition in the process. Because the teachers of the 70s, teachers of the 60s, that people who are in their 70s now talk about, they realize teachers who loved their jobs, who wanted to participate. Now you're talking of a teacher who comes to school, his children are back at home, they can't go to any school. His wife is grumbling. He can't satisfy her. He can't feed them, the children, the people at home. He can't give them the best quality. He can't even take them out for lunch. What do you think that person will come and offer? It's like saying you have an army of unhappy soldiers. Do you think you will be safe with those people carrying around the AK-47s going around? One day they can turn them on you and shoot you. This is the tragedy that we have. If we are honest about education, let's make sure that we take our education where it was supposed to be. Let's invest in it. Let's inspire the teachers. Let's make them happy. You know what? One thing that happened when President Mnangagwa became president, there was a Shikiro at the National Sports Stadium. And I want to quote, and I always repeat this one. He says, President, speaking in Shona, says, Nyika, hamugoni kuitonga muchitungamirira vanhu vane nzara. Put in English, the spirit medium was saying, you can't lead this country into prosperity if you are going to be leading hungry people. This is what is happening. Now, this is not just about leading hungry people. It's about leading hungry people who have lost faith and hope in the process. They then become dangerous. And this is what we are saying to the government. President Mnangagwa, the surplus that Mtuli Ncube always talks about, let's invest it in education. It's not just about the roads. You develop the roads, they become very beautiful. The teachers can't even ride on those roads. They don't have the cars. You are talking of teachers who in the early 80s were able to buy a house, were able to buy a car, were able to send their kids. Now they have no houses. Those that were in the service that were retired, look at the damage, the collateral damage on education. Headmasters who served for 40 years as headmasters at affluent top schools, they are getting pension amounts of 23,000 RTGS, amounting to about 150 US. Somebody who dedicated their time, effort, and energy, they are getting 23,000. You want to tell me that education will still remain afloat as a service that attracts anybody to it?
I sit down in post-cabinet briefing just a week ago, and the permanent secretary was saying that government engages teachers and that pupils will be ready to write exams this year, in her words, and this was coming from your membership. Let us talk about that.
That is the madness that we are talking about. We have a country it's said that people who are in cabinet last set for exams in the 60s. They know nothing about what education entails now. The kids we are talking about learned from January, February, and March this year, and nothing happened. April, May, June, we talked of e-lessons, television and radio lessons, many that were not accessed by many. If you interrogate it downwards and backwards, you discover that the same kids who assume were in Form 3 last year went to school for only 4 months when COVID came into this world. So you are talking of kids who are supposed to be shepherded and railroaded into an exam after going to school for 7 months, when ordinarily they should have gone to school for about 13 months in the 2 years in question. So what are we saying? We are saying the kids did not get education. We are saying they are ready for it. Who is making them ready? How did they get ready? We have kids with hearing and sight challenges. There was no program for them. You tell us of radio lessons. How will kids with hearing impairments benefit from radio lessons? You tell us of TV lessons. What of those kids who have visual impairments? So, and those issues are not addressed. You look at the poor of our country. The mother cannot even afford a bundle of vegetables, but you want them to afford a bundle for data. And that data is too expensive. The service providers are making a killing. And those are the issues that we are raising to cabinet and say, exams cannot happen now because kids have not been taught. But because people are ticking their boxes, they must get out and say exams in 2021 retake. When? October. Exactly as was planned. And they are celebrating going through their milestones at the expense of the poor children, at the expense of what we are giving them as professional advice. Add to that the issue of colors, continuous assessment learning areas. It's just chaotic. The teachers that are dejected, that are bitter, whose morale is at its lowest ebb, is supposed to go and supervise these colors, mark the colors and bring the results to send to ZimSec. It's the same teacher who is saying, I am hungry, I am not able to take myself up. Same teacher who has gone through a divorce, a separation, and is going through serious traumatic challenges. And this is why we are saying to government, engage your stakeholders. I'm here to hear Mr. Gundari saying they were engaged, but I've read what Zimta has said about colors, to say you can't introduce colors now because we are not ready for them. They are not explained. In other words, you are going to a grade 7 kid who can't even write your name or his name to say go and do a research about fisheries. And in the village where they stay, there's not a single fish. The rivers are dried up. What are you trying to tell us? You want to go to a kid who is in Form 4 to say, go and do a colors research on something about an agricultural initiative that exists. Yet in that particular area, all the farms that are there is just derelict land. There's nobody doing any production. So how are we of value and of relevance to these kids? Why are we rushing through these processes? In other words, when people who stand up to make some of these challenges, you suddenly discover that there are people who got paid somewhere and they must justify that the money that they got was put to good use. It's nothing about us going through the processes as we want to. Somebody is ticking a box and justifying expenditure of money that we never saw. And these colors are just chaotic. Exams can't happen in 2021 because the students are not ready. We know the students. We are the teachers. We know when we have done our work. We are the people who cover the syllabuses. We are trying to catch up with these kids. As we speak, a new thing has come up. Teachers who are not vaccinated get out of school. No engagement, no dialogue. What does that do now? The education calendar that we already were questioning is also thrown under the bus. The headmaster of the school, who most likely is also not vaccinated, has to leave forthwith. Who does he leave the keys with? And what is going to happen? ZimSec has introduced a new wave of registration. The headmaster is no longer there. The BESA who is not vaccinated is not there. Who is going to receive the money? All this coterie of confusion tells you the left hand is doing what the right hand is oblivious about.
You can come in.
Yes, I couldn't agree with you, Raymond, more. you see, blessed, what is happening is that all the things we have talked about now speak to the need to be flexible in terms of the calendar, say the exams calendar, school calendar. What should inform this is the need for us to have a learner who has received adequate learning time. Not just teaching to the test in order to write a test. No. We want to teach these learners so that we prepare them adequately through life skills, right? A comprehensive curriculum that has been adopted now speaks to that. That we have to prepare them for life. We have to adequately give them the skills that they require in order to go out there to the world of work and even for enjoyment of life. Those who want to be entrepreneurs, they do that. But then we will not do that if we were then going to rush. Yes, they talk about consultation and engagements. And we give them our view, we give them our positions. So it now behooves them to listen to that together with the other partners and stakeholders. By the way, we are not a force that fights the ministry. We are there to collaborate with them. We are partners. So they must take it from us when we say what is coming from the ground is that the ground is not ready. There's need for flexibility. There's need for adjustment. So this is what is going to provide a solution for now. So that then going forward, these good ideas, these good plans are then going to be implemented properly in order to benefit the learner. I understand some of these things have been introduced in order to benefit the learner. To say you need to be continuously assessing a learner and you'll be building up to the final grade or the final score that you will see on the certificate. That is continuous assessment. At the same time, they sit for an hour or 2 hours and then they get a mark and then they get a final result you will see on the certificate. Good, but why rush that? Why implement it in a way which is going to confuse everybody and make it appear that the whole strategy is wrong?
Can you speak to me about the quality of the learner that you're producing right now? What is the quality of the pupils that we have in our classes today?
Half-baked, because we have shortchanged them in terms of the contact time, in terms of the absence of the tools and resources that they need, in terms of providing the environment that is needed in order to bring them up, the infrastructure that Raymond talked about earlier. So we have shortchanged the learners. We are rushing them. We want them to go and write because they are of age. They are of writing age, so they must write. So they are half-baked. That quality will not be there. And yet, this is what we have been lamenting over the times, to say, lately, we discover that the graduates that are being churned out of universities talk to people in industry. I want to believe that HR practitioners now are reviewing the way they interview because they are discovering that some of the university graduates, even with first class, put them into the field of work. They need 2 or 3 more years in order to come to terms with what is happening in the field they specialized in even in university. So this is why some of these changes are coming. So we are half-baking our learners. It's worse now in the wake of COVID-19. It's worse now in a situation where the teachers spend half the time at home because they failed to go to school and half the time in class, and even half that time they are in class, they are disengaged. So we have shortchanged the learners, and it's very sad. The learners are going to miss out. Already they are behind on their dreams. And we know in our Zimbabwean context that we are almost at a point where we believe that the only thing that can take you out of poverty if your family is poor is education. So how are they going to be taken out of poverty? Yes, some are lucky. They will run into money.
But you're educated, you're a teacher, and you're complaining about poverty. So education doesn't really work, does it?
You see, this is the irony. An educated person shouldn't ideally be a poor person. Shouldn't. But this is what is beginning to happen now. You become poor because you get incapacitated. You cannot work your way up to financial freedom, right? A basic salary should assist you to work your way to financial freedom. It used to happen in this country. We used to have a standard 6 teachers. Standard 6. They donned their white shirts, nice white shirts. See, my shirt doesn't have a pocket because I don't have the $20 bill to put in. When you put on that white shirt, you are then supposed to put a $20 bill, which is always there. It was very valuable, right? They're the best homestead in the rural areas. They had a little shop that the community relied on.
Sent their kids to school.
They sent their children to boarding schools. I think one other thing that you talked about fees and how schools have migrated. Look at what has happened to boarding schools, most of them mission schools. Now, they are 3/4 of the way towards being private schools in terms of the fees that they are charging. Right? That kind of teacher I'm talking to you about, he had a very big family of 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14 children. All of them went to boarding schools. Just on the salary, right? And the other, I talked about the small shop. You talked about the plot of land and a small head of cattle. Put that together. The income that comes from there puts a teacher at a certain status that was respectable in the community, in the society. So we are simply saying, let's go back where we used to be.
You talk about status. There's a video that has been doing the rounds just over the past week where the PEMSEC said we expect teachers to borrow money and be at their stations. Did you watch that, and how did you feel about it?
Very unfortunate statement. It should not have been said that way, and there shouldn't have been a laughter the way it happened. Of course, many people will then after that also look at the media and say, was that properly captured in the correct context? And after that, many people also look at the speaker and say, probably that was the best way of putting it across to your principals. But unfortunately, it hurt all the teachers out there. That should not have happened. Issues to do with teachers, issues to do with education should be discussed formally, and a lot of respect and empathy must come with such discussions. Not only that, we should then move on to implement. I would have loved a situation where that particular sitting of government should have then come up with a quick resolution to say from here onwards, this is what we are going to do. We are going to send buses down there. We are going to give monies to all the people who have failed to come to work. Because this happened where at a situation where 15% to 20% of the teachers had not gone. Right? Where would they go and borrow? And then, yes, another minister also comes up and says, now teachers are capacitated because we have gems. Really? The fact that we have come up with a compulsory scheme, not following proper channels of consulting the particular teachers, and only giving a handful of teachers loans does not make all teachers capacitated. It doesn't. It doesn't at all.
Are you a laughingstock as teachers?
We have been made to become a laughingstock by the state. It appears there's a serious concerted effort. And the best way any institution can trivialize a profession is to pauperize it, make it dependent, make them a hands-out outfit, which is what has happened. This is why you go through any media presentation. There's a teacher who has been caught stealing a teacher stole a goat, a teacher did that, a teacher caught somewhere. All that is, as far as I'm concerned, all systematically designed to a point where somebody wants to make teachers irrelevant, make education irrelevant, but ultimately the nation will pay the ultimate price because of that. Because the chaos and the confusion that we are breeding and brewing will be too ghastly to contemplate. It's only a matter of time. We are sitting on a time bomb as we speak. But the real tragedy now is we are simply saying the parents guardians are supposed to put their foot down and say, respect our teachers. The tragedy is when parents and teachers suddenly think that teachers must also be pulverized. We must exterminate teachers, we must put them to extinction because teachers are just too much, which is a tragedy. Because ultimately, the price shall be borne by the nation.
You spoke about infrastructure in institutions. We have seen because of COVID that schools have failed to fund their existence. What is the real state outside there?
I think the one is to put it into context. We have private schools built by people who have money, who are politically connected, those that advertise on television that we see, those that put adverts in the media. They have state-of-the-art classrooms, state-of-the-art boarding facilities, state-of-the-art sports fields, and they're doing it because, like President Gundane said, they are commercializing education. They are privatizing private education. And what that does is, it looks sexy to those people who think that if I take my kid to this particular school, they are going to ultimately come out nice, they are well-mannered, they speak anglicized English, and you now go to this school out there in Binga, in Gwanda, in Cholocho, in Chocholo, in Mwenes, where the PED, the DSI, or many others have never been to. It's a school by name. All you know is there's a school because there's a sign that says 20 kilometers. And if you go there, there's not even a single structure. The headmaster stays in some corner of the village, walks to school. There are no classrooms to talk about. In the structures that are there when it rains, nobody comes to school. And when it's in the evening, snakes, baboons, and other animals come and hibernate there. And when the teachers come to school the next day, the first thing is they have to sweep the room to remove the acrid stench of the feces left by these animals. And we have these schools in Zimbabwe as we speak. And what we are now talking about is, if we are going to make sure that we capacitate every child, let's invest the surplus that Mugabe talks about. Because why is that child a victim of that national neglect? Because as far as we are concerned, as we build the roads that the politicians want to drive their SUVs, because the people, what we are forgetting is the politicians have now brought in their Lamborghinis, they have brought in their SUVs, they want to drive on good roads. This is why the road infrastructure is very important for them. They've brought very low clearance vehicles that they can't drive in these...
Are you saying it's a selfish endeavor?
It's a selfish endeavor. Because ultimately, if one wants to interrogate, what exactly is it that we want to do? Who's going to be the greatest beneficiaries of these roads? It's them. Because they want to traverse and go everywhere. Go to their mines, go to their farms. These roads are not there for Mbuya Majongwe and Mbuya Mtang, who want to come and transport their tomatoes from Murewa to here. Because if you look at the roads that they are working on now, they are the roads that take them to certain places, into their rural homes. So ultimately, if you are going to look at what is going on the ground, as far as I'm concerned, we need a serious national effort. Let's go and do a nationals. Let's identify which schools in which part of the country need this facelift. Because we have classes, schools that don't have a single class, schools that don't have a single desk. And if you look at Mugabe's budgetary presentations, schools are not there. You can't then be talking of investment in education when in actual fact we don't see infrastructural facelifts that are supposed to be happening. Because as far as we are concerned, it's actually a big disservice to our country to leave schools in the current state that they are in out there and think that Zimbabwe will become a middle-income economy with people who are not educated, people who have never seen a desk, people who have never sat on a stool in their lives to ultimately become part and parcel of the middle-income status that we want to crave for in 2030.
Maybe, you said that education is a public good and at best is supposed to be free. But I've posited that I don't believe that education should be free. I believe that people should be capacitated, should be made, should have money so that they can decide and they can fund that education model so that it is it is better for their children. It is also, it does have that infrastructure that Mugabe is talking about, so that, unlike going to a Zupco, how difficult it is for you to get into a Zupco because it is cheap, how luxurious it is for you to hire a Uber, how convenient and everything for you. So if we have a nation of well-paid parents, we can have a better education system. What is your view on that?
Right. In the paradigm, you should look at the paradigms where this is working. And I want to believe that one day we want to find ourselves there, where education is free. Let's put it free in courts, where fees are not paid, levies are not paid, and things like that. But in terms of the other things, the parent will then have to make a contribution, isn't it? Uniforms are a cost to education, isn't it? The breakfast that the learner eats in the morning is a cost to education. The shoes, part of the uniform, everything is a cost to what? Is a cost to education. So ultimately, yes, parents will still have to make a contribution. But even the same meal that I talked about, when we get to the situation where we want to even out the ground to bring up to speed even the poor to participate, even those meals are supposed to be provided in school, right? So this is how it would work. You start by managing your resources well. We are very comfortable, Raymond will agree with me, that oftentimes government has challenged us to say, come up with solutions. And so we are also going to talk about the economy and how probably certain things could be managed. Look at the national resource. Let's talk about minerals, for example. This is where the money would come from. Right from minerals, right from agriculture, the big estates and the farms. The money already to do that would come directly, go into government coffers, which coffers are then going to take care of education and health, isn't it? So that already cushions everything and makes the ground even for everybody. Go to Botswana and see the kind of schools they are building now, what they call senior secondary, junior secondary schools. They are like Belvedere Teachers College in Botswana there. So it is possible. You bring up such infrastructure because we have your proceeds from mining. You see that? You pay your teachers well. You don't have to pay building fund. You don't have to pay all these buses because your resources being well managed from the mines. We are well endowed with minerals. I don't know, we can count beyond 70, isn't it? And people are discovering new. So we just changed the model of how we do it. You fund it centrally and you help the young people. So you also are cushioning your people, the citizenry. Yes, they will come and make a contribution because I've indicated that there are so many costs that we talk about when we talk about the costs of education. But the basic things could be done. So in our thinking, as we plan for this country to be one great economy one day, we should also be thinking about those things, about that huge safety net.
Amazing. Just in conclusion, we've run out of time, but just in conclusion, what are the quick fixes that we need to have to save our country from getting into this hellhole where education has lost its luster? And I remember at one point, kids in Slovela would tell their teacher that I don't want to be in class because I am actually making more money than you when I go korokozaring. Then, what do we need to do that?
I think the first and the most important thing we need to do is to accept that our education system is facing a serious crisis. And like I've always been agitating for, we need to start off with an education indaba. To say what is the state of our education in the country. Because once we do that, we are then able to draw a big chart and say, these are the challenges that we have. In terms of morale, in terms of teacher upkeep, in terms of conditions of service, in terms of the law, in terms of policy, in terms of admin. Because we have a situation here where everything about education is wrong. There's not even something to celebrate now. You go to ZimSec, there's chaos. Exams, chaotic. You come into schools, admin, headmasters are having serious challenges. You go into the teachers themselves, their lives, suicides, divorces, social ills, many things are happening. You go to the kids, you go to discipline, drug abuse, sex, all these things need to be challenged. And we are saying we will not be able to identify how we must address our challenges in education without a no-holds-barred intervention, where we are saying everybody is a stakeholder. The churches come in, the private investors come in, private sector, the people who are employers, people to do with agriculture, the universities. Because what we have here is a situation where ultimately we have a coterie of challenges and nobody is there to address them. Because it's not about attendance, which I think is the real challenge that the ministry and the government is facing to address. Because first and foremost, you will then get told that 70% of the teachers are in class and 30% are yet to borrow to come. To those people who are then saying, very soon we deal with the 30, we are done because 100% teachers are in class. What of those that are in class and doing nothing? What of those that come in? And there's another challenge that I want to put across, which I think has been bedeviling our education system for a very long one. So many unprofessional fingers putting their fingers into the pie. You go to many rural schools out there, politicians come in, they say, we don't want this teacher, this one must go out, we don't want this headmaster, that one must go out. They are not trained to do that. They don't even have the capacity. Schools are no-go areas for anybody and everybody. So that we are able to allow to say the professionals must be able to be in the setup and be able to address the challenges that we are facing. And I think also another point that we need to put across is how best are we going to instill confidence to the teachers? The issues of their salaries, issues of their conditions of service. Have we done justice to the teacher that we want? The teacher that we want, what sort of a person is this person? Does he report for duty? Does he everything on a hungry stomach? Wearing torn shoes and a tattered shirt? Somebody who then is only expected to come and say, kids, today we're on page 2, this is your homework, go and do it and come back and the marks the work and the tears there. What about the self-satisfaction of that teacher, male or female? Don't forget that within the teaching fraternity, many of the teachers that we have are single mothers. They are struggling to survive. Terrible, because they can't look after their own children. Yet you want to come, bring them into class and supervise and preside over other kids. And ultimately, what that does is we are being a disservice to ourselves, because we are not going to get the best out of them. The moment we create a happy workforce, the results will be there and the nation will celebrate in the glory. So as far as we are concerned, my plea to the government, my plea to the president, let's invest in education. Let's give teachers what is due to them and make sure that we take our education forward.
Any parting shots, just briefly?
Yes, the best thing we can do is to make sure that we adequately fund the education. I agree totally. Ordinarily, what happens is that around 13% of the budget goes towards education. I understand it is like that across most African countries. That's not enough. Let's go beyond 20% and start from there. Let's also improve our engagement internationally and locally and bring in other players who will assist by making sure that they mash our resources together and they make a huge contribution towards education. This is going to help us as a country in the long run.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me on this incisive discussion that we've just had on the education sector in Zimbabwe. What is the state of the education in Zimbabwe and what can we do to improve it? Now, this was the free talk where we believe that dialogue is the only best place for us as a nation to build an alternative Zimbabwe, to achieve the best things that we want for us as a nation. This is our country, Zimbabwe. This is a country that we need to build together. And education is at the center of that development. Every time we walk out we should remember all the accountants, all the engineers, all the doctors, all the nurses who today provide us service, and all the politicians who today lead us are products of ECD, are products of grade 1. They are products of a schooling system. If we destroy that nucleus of this society, and if we do not give it our best, we ultimately destroy this nation. This is the Free Talk, and I am yours, Dara Blessed Mhlanga. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for choosing us as your station of choice. This was the Free Talk, proudly brought to you in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation and Heart and Soul TV and Radio. We believe that dialogue is the crux of development. When people talk to each other, when people listen to each other, development happens. On Free Talk, we believe in political dialogue, economic dialogue, and social dialogue. Everybody must be heard. Everybody has a right to be heard. Free Talk, talking that moves nation. Free Talk, talking that makes a difference. This is the Free Talk.